Welcome everyone to our Mars retrograde cycle in Aries webinar. And just to highlight Mars retrograde or Mars in Aries, as if any of you are not noticing it, I am finally sitting down to a computer where I'm not typing. I've just come off of a long week and almost a week with family in town. And in typical Mars Aries fashion, my hands are going to be still enough that I have put lotion on 3 knife cuts. There's a little Mars and Aries laughter for you there.
And that's hard to do with her because she doesn't know what a sharp knife looks like. She's so
I have knife karma. I
yeah.
don't like knives. So yeah, so I think I got my hands lathered up to heal while I present this webinar and type with only one finger. As you can see on your screen, the dates of the Mars retrograde cycle is going to be September 9th through November 13th of 2020. Mars is going to go retrograde at 28 degrees Aries all the way back to 15 degrees Aries. Whoops, wait a minute. I got to get a click in here. Before we get started, though, our housekeeping slide. Here are the ways that you can learn evolutionary astrology with us. We do a new moon, full moon podcast. We just finished that up. You can go to our website or that link when you get the PDF of these PowerPoint slides. Click on that. We got our Astro Library. Our YouTube channel was in purgatory for about 6 months. It came back early May, spur of the moment. Of course, our Evolutionary Astrology course, and I have been doing consultations with people on astrology for over 30 years now. Stay tuned. If you don't subscribe to our email newsletter, you may want to. This summer, I did a online workshop because we weren't traveling with the Manitoba Astrologers Association, and I redid my cycle of phases and aspects. I can't remember how many hours, maybe 8-10 hours. Very, very pleased with it. Leroy almost has it put together. We will be offering it for sale this fall. And then we have been in process of combining our segments 1 and 2 of our course. So our evolutionary astrology course is going to be segment 1, the basics, and segment 2, everything else. We will also be offering that later this fall, so stay tuned. You'll get emails giving you more details on that. So here is the Sonatic cycle of Sun and Mars from conjunction to conjunction. You can see that Mars first went into its pre-shadow July 25th when it came to 14 degrees Aries. Again, the retrogrades, the highlight, the opposition of the Sun to Mars, October 13th will be 21 degrees Libra Aries. And you can see when Mars leaves its post-shadow after turning stationary direct. The highlight of any planetary retrograde is either interior planets Mercury, Venus conjunction to the Sun, or exterior planets Mars on out, their oppositions to the Sun. Whenever a planet is retrograde, it is always the time period that it is closest and therefore brightest with planet Earth. Now, Mars went into Aries June 27th, and it'll be there until January 6th of 21. Mars' longest transit through any sign always occurs when it has its retrograde cycle. Sometimes it's 1 sign, sometimes it's 2 signs. This time, 1 sign, Aries, which means that in this particular Mars, in a Mars cycle, this one with its retrograde, 25% of its passage to the zodiac is in 1 sign, Aries. And so, of course, its archetypes and energy are going to be emphasized, having a retrograde cycle in its own sign of rulership. If you live in the United States, have you noticed any anger out there on the streets with the protesting around racial inequality? We have 4 months to go with Mars in Aries, including that retrograde cycle. Stay tuned. The beginning of the year, I said 2020 was going to be a wild ride. Little did I know that a little virus would make it so. I also was saying that this Mars retrograde cycle would be violent, not knowing quite how it would turn out. And that is definitely the case. And so everything you can do to access that Libra polarity, to listen, to try to get along with others as long as they are not hurting you or trampling on you. The best that you can pray for peace and espouse peace. Very important here these last few months of the year. Quickly, Mars astronomy, you can see on your screen, it's about a 2-year cycle around the sun, a little bit longer through the zodiac, goes retrograde every other year. This is a shorter retrograde cycle. Thank you. And when Mars slows down to turn retrograde or direct, it actually looks like it's standing still in the sky for 3 days each time. And the Mars retrograde cycles have a tendency to almost go forward in the zodiac a sign at a time, a little bit longer than that. So you can see the dates on your screen, how we went. Leo, Virgo, Libra, Sag, Scorpio. Anybody remember the Mars retrograde in Aquarius, Capricorn in 2018? Just before the midterm elections here in the United States. Here's the visual, in case you want to see that, how we would look at it from planet Earth as we go around the sun inside the orbit of Mars and travel faster than Mars around the sun. It looks like Mars makes that zigzag in the sky for us. The archetype of Mars. Now, Mars rules Aries in the first house, so understand this is a signature for both Mars and for Aries. We'll expand on some of these a little bit more. But Mars rules the first archetype of the zodiac, Aries' first house. It's active polarity, cardinal modality, fire element. So that instinctive desire to act and become is what Mars is. And because it's a fire element and it's the first of the 3 fire elements, Aries, Leo, Sag, the fire signs or the fire element has a key phrase in EA of a sense of special destiny. And when we apply it to Aries as the first archetype, we don't know what it is. We just sense that we have to act, to become, to do, to, create. And so this then creates a desire or need to have our freedom to go any direction we want, to follow wherever our instinct says to go in being and creating on planet Earth. Well, what happens via that Libra polarity, we run up against the boundaries of what we can do or expand or say. And so that kickback or reaction, feedback, will create frustration and anger because from Mars Aries first house perspective, we perceive our freedom as threatened. And so this is the basis of what creates that instant rage, anger, frustration with this archetype. Now, Mars is also with this instinctive desire to become. EA calls it the leading edge of our conscious desire nature. And in EA, we have a dual desire nature, separating desires, anything and everything. I want a new house. I want a lover, a job, a car, a bank account, a purse, a pair of shoes, money, whatever. The returning desires are basically one, to no source. And in natural law, we exhaust those separating desires until eventually, why am I here? What's this all about? It starts to inch its way into consciousness more and more. And eventually, when we've exhausted the separating desires, the only desire left will be source. And by the way, one of the last separating desires to exhaust is the sexual desire. Mars rules that instinct to procreate. In natural law, it's one of the last ones to let go. Now, Mars relates to Pluto, which represents the soul in EA, and Pluto represents those unconscious desires that we have. We know them by sign generationally and natal Pluto house individually. And so Pluto will, the soul will make those desires conscious via Mars. And so Mars is always getting these spontaneous hits from Pluto and wanting to act upon it. All this gets stirred up when Mars goes retrograde, no matter what sign it is in, magnified with this retrograde in Aries. So the Mars archetype is always that process of self-discovery. It's where it's a cardinal modality, if you remember, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Always wanting to be in a continuous state of becoming, evolution, action. We will also call it our subjective consciousness on an egocentric level. As I said before, it has rulership of the sexual energy in acting upon it. Mars in the active polarity signs, Aries, Gemini, Leo, etc. They're known active polarity or masculine polarity. It's energy moving outward. We initiate. Mars in the feminine signs, which would be Taurus, Cancer, Virgo, etc. They're known as the feminine polarity, although it goes way beyond genders. But if you want to relate it this way, Mars in those signs will then kind of calm down that energy going outward and work a little bit more of attracting it to us. This is true in gender. This is true in general for the 2 genders, masculine, feminine. But of course, as you look at any individual chart, you can see things turn topsy-turvy depending upon where planets are by signs and houses, etc. So transiting Mars is always the leading edge of our soul's evolution, its desired nature, and its sexuality. And so when Mars goes retrograde in general, regardless of sign, emphasized in this retrograde cycle, there is going to be a natural buildup of sexual energy that has to be released. This is why you can sometimes see so much frustration going on with Mars, because Mars is instinctively acting. Mars retrograde is considered actions, as we'll ponder. And so that just naturally builds up energy, not only sexually, but in all kinds of areas. In the sexual arena, it can be one of the ways that we can release the energy that builds up, that then allows Mars to calm down, slow down, and do that consideration before acting. In general, planetary retrogrades are an Earth-centered phenomena. From our perspective here, the planets appear to slow down, go retrograde, and then go forward in the sky. Planetary retrogrades offer an opportunity to break free and align yourself with your own individual natural laws with that planetary archetype. The retrograde causes us to withdraw from status quo, to redefine that archetype according to what we think is best for us. So planetary retrogrades turn us inward to find the answers from within ourselves. And as you shall see, the opposite sign of the retrograde is those answers as well. The opposite sign that the planetary retrograde moves through. I can feel this Mars energy. Okay, slow down, Kim. Take a breath. So a retrograde planetary archetype is non-static. It's still moving, but it's just going more inward to create, to learn, to review, to release. And so typically, Mars example here, the sign that Mars is moving through, in this case Aries, and wherever that is by house for you. For me, third house communications, the entire retrograde cycle, that's going to define how that retrograde is manifesting. I think Leroy and I, for at least the last month or so with each other, have just been saying, you feel Mars energy in Aries? Oh my God, I'm sorry I bit your head off, honey. I apologize. And, back and forth being, just short, direct, impatient, and having to go before the retrograde. So then that opposite sign in house, which in this case is going to be Libra, and wherever Libra is for you by house or houses, again, that's going to provide those answers for you personally, the clarity and expression. And if you happen to be one of those souls who were born with Mars retrograde natally, you get the temporary harmony while Mars is transiting retrograde. The Mars direct people can feel more frustrated, and the Mars retrograde people in Aries may have some frustration, but wherever their natal Mars retrograde is by sign and house, they're going to have a little more clarity than normal. For those of you, if you're not aware of this, Leroy was born with Mars retrograde in Pisces, of all signs, and in his 10th house of career. And so, honey, maybe career will slow down for you and work will kind of slow down for you just a little bit during Mars retrograde, as your wife has announced 2 new things that we're going to promote this fall. Oh, maybe not. Maybe you'll just prioritize better and feel like you have a little more focus going on with all of that. So again, another thing to remember here is, and this is true for every planet, substitute any planet for Mars. But the transiting Mars retrograde cycle, wherever it's happening for you in the sign Aries and house, is always going to be related back to your natal Mars archetype by wherever it is natally, sign, house, aspects. So one more time, in Leroy's example with a Mars retrograde in Pisces 10th house, he can feel these Mars retrograde frustrations, perhaps some of the technical stuff in putting together all my webinars in PowerPoint slides in YouTube, downloads and listenings. Maybe some of them might not go quite as smoothly as he wants them to. And so with this Mars retrograde, it's just going to be about pacing himself and just allowing the goal, 10th house, to arrive as it does with making the effort. And sometimes with a Mars retrograde, we have to make a repetitious effort. If we kind of know what the emergent desires coming out for us are, sometimes we do it more than once with Mars retrograde. Now, Mars rules surgery in general, just a little tidbit for you. And the rule of thumb is if you can avoid surgery during Mars retrograde, it's best to do so. If you break your wrist, you might need to get it set instead of waiting. But if you can go for any elective type of surgery, doing it during Mars direct is known to help the surgeon, Mars rules surgery again, be calm, be steadier, be less frustrated in whatever work they are having to do. And so here we're going to one more time it's going to be throwing off the old desires that no longer serve us so we can have the evolution of new conscious desires showing up for us. I'm sure if I asked Leroy, he would come through with a whole list of things that he would like us to change at EAN to simplify his world. Sorry, don't mean to be teasing you, Leroy, in regards to example. But you may be having some flashes for yourself, Leroy, on making peace, Pisces, with, you know, work and career, not only as we head into our fall nature indoors in the Northern Hemisphere, but as you move through this through a Mars retrograde with your projects, 10th house for the fall. Mars retrograde in general, considered actions versus impulsive actions. And this is a huge theme for Mars retrograde in Aries. Okay, what's the best foot forward? Okay, what is the best foot forward? Okay, what is the best foot forward? I am very fond of saying that the hardest retrograde to go through is Mars retrograde, just because of this whole concept of considered actions versus impulsive actions, then slowing down in that regard. Here's the Mars stationary retrograde chart for September 9th, 2020. I put old charts for Washington, D.C., and I use the Aries houses, 0-degree Aries, so that we all get to see the planets in their signs and their aspects, and we get the general archetypes. One of the things that you can see here, now let me see how I go with this. Okay. Obviously we have, you know, Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn retrograde in Capricorn. As Mars turns retrograde next week, we have Sun in mid Virgo, and we have Uranus retrograde in approximately 10, 11 degrees. This is a wide trine in the Earth archetype. It has the potential to kind of calm the Mars retrograde down a little bit. It also, though, could create some inertia or stubbornness in these earth signs for Mars. And so utilize it to get outdoors in nature, take a deep breath, calm down however best you can, but also be open to change as Mars slows down and turns directions here the middle of next week. We have Neptune square the nodes in this stationary retrograde chart. Neptune will not be an exact square to the nodes till January, so we will feel Neptune square the nodes of the moon throughout this entire Mars retrograde cycle. Where is the truth? What is the bottom line? What we have to be careful of is Mars creating confusion around what's facts, what's truth, what to believe. And so I also feel one more time while we have to slow down with Mars and go inward. To be retrograde in Aries is initiating in general a new 2-year cycle. And so we don't just give up and stop doing things for the 66 days it's retrograde. We pay attention to the intuitive hits to go forward, and we make the effort to do so. Now, I'll say more on this in a little bit here, but potential here for there to be even more violence when Mars goes retrograde. Just because in general, that need for freedom and independence that is then out there in this world, as we shall see with charts, creating frustration from both what we will call inclusive and exclusive points of consciousness. And so it can increase the spontaneity of outbursts. It can increase the tempers. As I gave with example for Leroy and I, watch that tendency for verbal arguing. I'm right, you're wrong. That will be just as strong as any impulsive actions that just go out and about everywhere. So it might be the physical actions, but it might be your own mouth that you have to be careful with. This is going to sound like a Mercury retrograde. Drive defensively. Take a deep breath. Count to 10, count to 20 before responding instead of reacting. Watch out for other people who are not aware of Mars retrograde and are on the edge of exploding. Energize peace as much as you can with what we see going on with all these other planetary aspects in the Capricorn stellium. We can see the consensus consciousness going to extremes here in defending the status quo, defending the past, going to war. Leroy kept saying for, oh gosh, I think the last 2 years, Leroy has said, I'm just worried about Trump going off and starting a war somewhere in the world just to create the chaos and the fear and get reelected. Well, how about a domestic war? How about turning on your own citizens? There can be all kinds of underhanded things going on. Or Mars retrograde in Aries, the underhanded subtle stuff would be the Libra polarity. The Mars in Aries stuff is going to be just outright outrageous. Trump violating the Hatch Act, the law that says you do not use the White House for political or campaign purposes, and doing his convention there. They will also try to instill fear. You know, that aggressiveness of Mars, when that starts coming out at you, what does it create for you? It creates fear. And then you go into fight or flight. Do I defend myself or do I run? Well, it can have plenty of that in various literal and figurative ways here over the next couple of months. In regards to COVID, and if you've not been paying attention to the news, yes, South Dakota has now reached the top of the states in highest infections per capita, coming off of the Sturgis motorcycle rally. They estimated we had about 460,000 bikers come to our state and Sturgis for 10 days. The best the research shows is 60% of the counties in the United States had bikers show up. Phew. So they came here, spread it, now taking it out. We can see this Mars retrograde creating chaos in regards to the virus, and probably the biggest way is going to be the rush to get a vaccine and not going through all of the vetting with the testings to see how efficient it will be. Typically, the flu vaccine that comes out every year, it varies widely in efficacy, anywhere from 15 to 60%. Its average is to be 20 to 40% effective. We have no idea where the COVID-19 vaccine or vaccines will be, as every country in the world is rushing to do it. And Donald Trump has refused to participate with WHO, the World Health Organization, in sharing information and sharing the vaccines and trying to really prioritize that those in most need are prioritized in getting it. Sorry about that syntax there. Stay tuned. More of that in the news as we go through this. And I think that as Mars makes these 3 waxing squares to Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Capricorn, it's still going to come down to the Capricorn practicality and basics. The hand washing. Plain soap and water destroys the fat layer of the virus surrounding the virus. Yes, social distancing. Nothing replaces diet, exercise, and rest, self-quarantining. It's still going to be what we have to do for the next 1 to 2 years because it's going to be here for a while. And even with a vaccine, it is going to take a while to build up the herd immunity. If you live in the United States, we are still running, 4.5% of the world's population and almost 25% of the infections and deaths. Ridiculous for our country. Mars retrograde might exacerbate all of this worldwide, though, not just for the United States. Just that frustration of everybody wanting their freedom. And I'm going to go do what I want to do. I'm going to go to a motorcycle rally in August, Mars and Aries. I'm going to, go here, go there, do whatever I want. You can't, all the backlash on the laws that we saw earlier this year in the United States, at least. If any of you are interested in my other work, my energetic balancing program that I've been on for 20 years, we have found 13 healing frequencies. That's how many variations we have for the coronavirus that we are in the midst of right now. That's how much the virus has mutated. And as I have observed this now for almost 6 months doing this type of work, people on our program, if they're exposed, they heal it, they create the antibodies, they don't even know they were exposed. Again, more information, you're welcome to contact us on that or go to our website. So, as we said, this retrograde cycle especially, we're going to want to breathe and slow down and then consider consequences of any actions. If I do this, what will happen? If I do that, what will happen? Those consequences are that Libra feedback, the polarity. And you may just want to ask yourself, what do I really want in my life right now? And ask more than once until your own instinctive, natural desires come into consciousness. And then that's where you can make those considered, deliberate actions through Mars retrograde. And if it's highest and best for your good, it'll be there when Mars goes direct. If not, it may burn itself out during the next 2 months of Mars retrograde. So if you're making deliberate actions forward in any area of life, with family, with relationships, with career, with your health, where you live, if something doesn't bust loose, if something doesn't go forward, you can try again. But if you try multiple times and it doesn't go forward, then it may be that you're to let this go. It's just not there for you anymore. It just doesn't work. It's either not highest and best in your desired nature, or you've been there, done that. You've worn out that desire, exhausted it, and it's not going to go forward because Source isn't going to allow it. It's just not going to be there working for you. One more time. Doesn't mean we don't take action. And it doesn't mean we don't take more repetitive action to really bust out breakthrough. But we have to then act, react, act, consider. We have to have enough reflection to know, to intuit when something is just not going to move forward for us. We also have to make an effort to find healthy releases for the buildup of energy that occurs with Mars. Mars builds up energy naturally. Mars retrograde builds up more energy. Mars retrograde in Aries builds up even more energy. You can see my examples. Can you exercise, walk, breathe, meditation, yoga, sex, projects, cleaning, gardening, building something? Just giving yourself some simple ways to be in motion might be one of the best things you can do to keep your own energy buildups calmed down. And you also then want to make that effort to be flexible and open-minded. The attention spans are going to be short. People are going to interrupt. We're going to want to interrupt. It's going to require extra communications. The Polarity Libra is the psychology of listening. And then, oh, by the way, encapsulated in the Mars retrograde cycle is Mercury retrograde. October 13th to November 3rd, Mercury goes direct. Election day in the United States. Retrograde from 12 to 12 Scorpio, 26 Libra. Tail end, I'll give you the date of our free Mercury retrograde webinar coming up. In that regard, how can you be involved in the U.S. presidential election? These waxing squares of Mars to Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, 3 times each. They're going to require extra effort to create change and evolution within this country. We'll look at that in a little more detail here. And so we also then, bringing the Libra polarity into consideration, during this retrograde cycle, we want to learn how to consider the consequences of any actions, desires, and their impact upon others. So how do my words and actions affect someone else? How do another person's words and actions affect me? Libra is the psychology of listening, actually hearing what another person is saying, versus the Aries interject and want to bombard ourselves onto someone else. So can we listen to another person's idea? Can we listen to the opposite perspective? Leroy and I just came off of a long weekend in which we had a mini family reunion on my mom's side, and out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of half a dozen couples, more or less, we were the only liberals. So Roy and I were quiet. We listened. And then we would find that point where we would make a healthy comment. I feel really good that we made it through the weekend without being argumentative around politics. Well, we agreed to keep the TV off cable news, and it was either the Weather Channel or music. I think that helped a lot. And so, can you find that common ground, or can you politely agree to disagree? With Libra, it's learning when to act and when not to act, and when sometimes we need to just retreat, remove ourselves. It's not going to go anywhere for us. And then sometimes it's going to be the opposite. If you're the little quiet one, this Mars retrograde might have you say, enough is enough. I have to speak up. I have to act. I have Jupiter at 16 Libra, and I have Mars at 20 degrees Libra. So I'm having this Mars retrograde cycle oppose my Jupiter and oppose my Mars 3 times. And I've told myself I am just going to speak up when necessary, but I'm also not going to go looking for trouble, especially if I intuit that it's probably not going to necessarily get me anywhere. My natal Jupiter Mars is in the 9th house. I told you that Mars retrograde in Aries is in the 3rd. I'll point I'll get back to you on a podcast and whether or not I manage to follow through on my intent and to not go overboard, but also not be silent and speak up and be direct when it's necessary. So that Libra polarity here is going to ask us searching for that balance and equality in any areas of life. And it's going to ask us to find an inner peace through the chaos of Mars retrograde in Aries. Can we remain true to ourselves through whatever relationship circumstances we may be in the midst of? Now, to expound upon this just a little bit, the Aries Libra polarity is the archetype of the distortions into passive aggressive behaviors. We hear that, phrase tossed out a lot. Lorraine thinks my family is steeped in it. I was raised by two Sun and Libra parents. I have that Mars as well as Jupiter in Libra, and I can see where he gets that from. Aries is typically the aggressor, Mars is typically the pacifier, although it can flip around. If Aries is insecure, it's afraid to act out. Libra can go to the extremes and be dominating. But in general, you can see how passive aggressive distortions fall into this archetype. So there's going to be lessons for all of us in learning to be direct in our words and actions versus manipulating things behind the scenes, which is how my mother operated with regard to my rageaholic Sun in Libra first house father my whole life. We learned by osmosis. It's been a lifetime for myself and probably my sisters too, to some extent, of just going, I'm tired of this. Just speak up, get it out, and go forward. So healthy, respectful confrontations can sometimes clear the air and create a better foundation in certain relationships. Interestingly, with my father and his Alzheimer's, my mom over the last few years, 10 years, 5 years, has really found her voice. And she got rid of the passive and became aggressive and just has gotten into some raging arguments. And us daughters have been saying, Mom, we're glad you're speaking up for yourself, but it's a little too late. Dad's brain can't reason anymore. It's better for you to just entertain the conversation and just say, well, let's consider that tomorrow. Because tomorrow comes and my dad forgot all about it. So you see how there's all these variables. Needless to say, relationships are going to be very strongly in the picture, personally and collectively, as we look at a polarity point in Libra. So whatever's been simmering below the surface in relationships, family, intimate partner, work, friendship, probably bring out the whole works, they're going to surface. And hopefully we're going to be able to clearly, directly, respectfully discuss it out, create a new equilibrium. I have more hope for us doing it on a personal level than I do on a collective level, because this retrograde cycle can increase the extremes of opposites in any area of life, and especially on that collective level, and seeing that polarity increase between the left and the right, as you see here on the country of the United States. We also we'll find then that souls who are on that self-centered, self-focused, selfish end of the spectrum, they may find their will blocked in some way because it's the natural law way of Mars retrograde in Aries pointing out that you don't get to run the show. You have to have some consideration of others in how you are going to be and act. Now we can also have souls that are other centered on the opposite end of the spectrum. They acquiesce, they passive, they go along to get along. This retrograde cycle may find them in certain situations where they have to stand up for themselves. You can't be silent anymore. You can't let a certain abuse continue on in this relationship. You may have to remove yourself from the situation. Finding a safe way to speak up. If it's not safe enough to do it in person, you may have to do it on paper through a lawyer, etc. You get the point. So there's going to be an ebb and flow in balancing, initiating, receiving, speaking, listening. Energy moving out, energy going back in. And of course, the better that we make an effort to honor our intuition, whatever hits just spark up for you, then the better you can know when to go out and when to come in, when to speak and when to be silent or listen. And this will eventually help you find new levels of courage within yourself to go forward in creating your life and your world in whatever ways Mars is revealing itself to you. And you will do this with others as well, one-on-one, groups, family situations, more and more collectively. By the way, if you have attended the webinars before, I'm a very good monologue. Don't mean to. Sometimes it's just an easier format in webinars. If you have questions, you're always welcome to ask them in the Q&A. Leroy will answer. When appropriate, he will interrupt and either ask the question or unmute you for any interaction. I'm going to move into some of the aspects that are going on now. They're not a lot, but they're strong and intense. Here's the chart for the highlight of the Mars retrograde cycle. This is when Mars retrogrades back to oppose the Sun. They will do this October 13th at 21 degrees Mars retrograde Libra, Sun in Mars retrograde Aries, Sun in Libra, excuse me. And as you can see here, they have the squares to the entire stellium here drawn into this. And so with the stellium involved in this opposition, there may be earth events, and they may be physical earth events, Capricorn. They may be political or verbal or social earth events in some way. Stay tuned. We could have surprises. You know, in the US, they always call the US presidential election. There's always an October surprise. Stay tuned. This could portend for a bunch of them or some extreme ones. What we would hope to see is the ability to reach for compromises and create peace with those who are different than us. I think that's a long shot in this country. I think what we will have is just even more extremes of opinions and actions and perhaps even violence, because what we will find here with this stellium is it creates the T to the opposition between Mars and Sun. And so we also, if you will note, by the time we get to mid-October, Jupiter direct, Pluto direct, Saturn direct. And as these three go direct in Capricorn, this is their last gasp to have the power, the authority, the control. So it intensifies things in the middle of this Mars retrograde cycle. And so, of course, what this does, we still have trine coming through, this time with Moon and Venus in Mercury, to hopefully try and calm some things down. Stay tuned. We will see. But this then leads us to you just cannot ignore the United States July 4th chart if you live in this country. I've shown this slide before. Today I'm putting it, inner wheel is the US Gemini rising chart, and the outer wheel is the Sun opposition to Mars. And as you can see here with the US chart, this natal Mercury opposition to Pluto the Soul, the two retrograde planets, they're just being bombarded with the Saturn-Pluto conjunctions natal to natal Pluto, the Jupiter oppositions to natal Mercury. But we also have intense aspects from Pluto for 3 years here and Neptune for the next 2 years. So the outer planets are very, very active in the US chart. This is why you see this reflected right now out here in our world. And I'll speak to the racial unrest here in just a moment. But the Mars retrograde is, going to go over Chiron 3 times. Are we going to heal, or are we going to go to war with each other? Are the powers that be going to try to get us to go to war with ourselves, undermining any peaceful efforts to, sabotage evolution, social progress, and keep us stuck in old patternings, such as re-electing Donald Trump? We will also then have, their opposition pull in the Saturn and square even to the US Sun here. I'll show you some more on these in just a little bit. Probably don't need to tell anybody that as Pluto opposes Mercury 5 times this year, next year, the extremes of polarity and opinions between liberal and conservative groups in our country. And then as Pluto is balsamic to have its conjunctions with itself in 2022, do we re-elect a all in it for himself Republican again, and we have 2 more years of breakdown? Or do we manage to break through with the Jupiter-Saturn hits before Pluto conjuncts itself, and we inch forward a little earlier? Stay tuned. We're all going to find out here in a couple of months. Now, here's the dates. I didn't do all the aspects that Mars makes to the US chart. I just given you the dates for the conjunctions to Chiron and the squares to Mercury and Pluto. Based upon how things are right now, I think it's pretty obvious that conservative interests are going to continue to stoke anger, hatred, fear, and it will behoove a lot of us to remain calm. You can see here through the dates, it will go beyond however the November 3rd turnout is. I'll come back to more of this in just a little bit. First of all, anytime we have a Mars retrograde cycle and it opposes the Sun, There are also oppositions in here with Mercury and Venus because they never get very far away from the sun. So here's your dates and degrees of when Mercury, Sun, and Venus oppose Mars. And so when these inner planets have their oppositions, in this case to Mars, it can really help us with personal awareness in figuring out how best to go forward with our desired nature. The opposition aspect is awareness and objectivity. It brings that ability to hold those opposing ideas and opinions and then see where it best fits for us. So remember this, on a personal level, these inner planets can help you go forward with your desires. They can help you go forward with evolving your relationships if you're in one and that is what you're wishing to do. Now they can distort, they can intensify the polarities of opposing beliefs, opinions, ideas. They can also be part of creating extremes of actions or violence, or in some cases with Libra, inaction. I see all this going on, but I don't know what to do. Vote, vote. So will they bring an evolution to finding common ground, regardless of differences? Can we agree to disagree? Will we fall into a majority of either exclusive or inclusive principles? In evolutionary astrology, inclusive principles are giving, sharing, and including. Kind of what you will call the social democrat. Exclusive principles taking, hoarding, excluding, which we see a lot of with the thousands of years of patriarchal distortions. Now, Venus had a retrograde cycle in Gemini just a few months ago, and it made 3 waxing squares to Mars. And it was during this time period, as you look at these 3 squares, we're just getting ready to have the third and final one. You can see as these came across. And as we went through the midst of that Venus retrograde cycle, May 13th through June 25th. Can you reflect back a little bit on this and see how the public perception of Donald Trump's handling of the coronavirus turned majority of public away from him? It turned a lot of the independents away from him. Venus was making waxing squares to Mars. And so it was evolving our values. And I was one of the people way early on this year saying, wait a minute, 4% of the world's population and 25% of the deaths? That's ridiculous for a country that's supposed to be as wealthy as we are and that's supposed to have healthcare as good as we are. And more people started to recognize these facts, Gemini, and go, I don't think this is, yeah, no. And so when Venus comes to its opposition with Mars, it's going to bring this whole what do we value and therefore want, need, and desire and act upon it. It's going to come to a head with this Venus-Mars opposition. And I'm going to be here telling you right now, what do you value and how are you going to take action upon it? And you must be a part of the voting effort and getting out the vote if you want to see change happen. Not only do we have the Electoral College against us, a person who votes in Wyoming, their vote counts 3.5 times as much as someone who votes in California due to the Electoral College, which I am for letting go of. Due to the gerrymandering in the last 10 years of Republican legislators. You can win popular votes in your local communities and in your state legislatures, but you've got to win supermajority votes to make up for the gerrymandering. Don't settle for the polls showing Biden ahead. It is neck and neck. And so here's the Venus opposition to Mars. And it's going to happen with Mars retrograde at 15 Aries, Venus right here, smack dab on the US natal, Saturn in Libra, split between liberals and conservatives with its natal square to the US Sun in Cancer, including or excluding. And so this square is going to be activated by Mars and Venus. And one more time, this is going to come November 9th. It'll be a week after the election. And regardless of how it turns out, one side is going to be ecstatic, they won, and the other side is going to be pissed off and angry. And if Trump wins, the liberal side will be more pissed off than it was in 2016. This Mars retrograde cycle can cause whoever is on the losing side to be violent. Pray for peace. I think there will be a little less violence if Trump were to win re-election. Because if he loses, he's setting up his armies to just take up arms and become a militia. Pray for peace. I am my broken record. Pray for peace. Now, as we finish up this Mars retrograde cycle and move closer to the election, these inner planets, Mercury, Sun, and Venus, will move to Libra, and they're going to make last quarter squares to Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. And the Mercury retrograde cycle is going to have 3 last quarter squares to Saturn. And so we could see extremes of viewpoints. Don't always think as Libra as being peaceful. When Libra is distorted, it can trigger war, just like a Mars retrograde. Remember, as they're making these last quarter squares, okay, let's look at it from the perspective of the US chart. Here we have Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn. As these planets go through Libra, okay, Sun, Mercury, Venus making these last quarter squares, they're going to be over here with Mars having the oppositions. And wounded Chiron in Aries is going to be a warrior, just like Mars. And so it's just going to be quite heavy, quite active. Time's going to tell how this is going to slowly work its way out. And then while these inner planets are making their last quarter or waning squares to the stellium, Mars is making its waxing or first quarter squares. We've just finished up the first set of Mars waxing square, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto in August. How'd that go for us in the United States? The most intense one are the squares that will happen when Mars is retrograde in October. And then deciding, depending upon how this election goes and Mars goes direct, the third set of squares will come in December, January, along with Mars moving into Uranus, or into Taurus and conjuncting Uranus on, what do you call that, when the United States always has its election the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November. And the president who's elected always takes an oath of office on January 20th at noon the following year. So you can just see in a nutshell. We'll look at each of these separately, but I wanted to show you the time period of these 3 sets of squares Mars will make to the stellium. Tempers, short, impulsive violent decisions can be taken when we need Libran compromises and communication. So how are we going to go forward, war or peace? Here again, one more time, not just Leroy saying it, but throughout history, weak US presidents have looked for excuses to go to war. And here we have Donald Trump declaring, quote unquote, war on his own citizens. US presidents have always won re-election when there was a war going on. Well, this time so far, it's a domestic war, maybe a first. Will it spell his doom? Are more and more people recognizing? Multiple times he was asked, what's your plans for a second term? Has never come up with one single item. Multiple times, I'm going to come out with a health care plan, the best you've ever seen. He said that again the beginning of August. August came and went, nothing. Why fighting in the courts to destroy Obamacare completely. So the Mars squares to the stellium, extreme patience. Listen. Making that effort to be a part of moving society forward, however it requires you to be active in groups and active in the streets. So Mars made conjunctions to these stellium planets back early this spring in the March time period, kind of boom, 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 the last week of March, if you remember that. Most of us were traumatized with the virus, and so may not have even, remembered Mars conjunctions to Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn in that order. Well, now Mars is a quarter of the way around the circle, making 3 waxing squares. These are going to be energy buildups. Intensify Mars retrograde. With Jupiter, the energy is building up to change our beliefs. In a nutshell, from EA's perspective, it boils down to inclusive versus exclusive. So, how are you expanding your beliefs? Are we having that on a collective level in this country? One example is just a majority of Americans recognizing the extremes of racial inequalities that we have towards Black males in this country. You didn't need to shoot Jacob Blake in the back 7 times. You could have taken out the kneecaps. We don't do that. And so, from the conservative perspective of belief systems, they're afraid. They see themselves coming as the white minority. And they're going out there in any and all manners of directions and actions, Mars retrograde, to stall it as much as they can. Here's a little statistic for you. Last year, there were 1,100 citizens in the U.S. shot and killed by police. This is coming from the Mapping Police Violence, an independent research group. This is 1 year in the United States. Compare this with 55 fatal police shootings in England and Wales between 1990 and 2014. Compare this to 15 people shot in 2010 and 11 in Germany. I mean, it blows your mind. Try and, wrap yourself around that statistic, and then Jupiter, make sense of this. The only way to make sense of this is realize that our Pluto in Capricorn soul for a country has reached extremes of violence that the majority does not agree with. Stay tuned. We'll see what will happen with this. Mars waxing square Jupiter. Do your best to understand. And as you deepen and broaden your understandings, do your best to walk your talk with truth as well as you can. Here's the dates of Saturn, Mars squaring Saturn. You see again that conjunction. They actually had their conjunction back at 0 degrees Aquarius, and Saturn and Jupiter will initiate their conjunction with minutes of this on December 20th, 0.5 Aquarius. There is a broad long-term intent to create more equitable foundations in many countries with many groups that I think will come to pass. I think we will see broad evolution of that in the next Jupiter-Saturn cycle. But we have Mars retrograde stirring the pot to the max. Here the energy is building up to change our consensus societies. The exposure of old reality structures that are no longer working. And with Mars and Saturn, there's just anger that builds up. And the inequalities are not just racial, they're financial, they are healthcare, they are social. They've come in so many ways between those Capricorn extremes of haves and have-nots. Well, Saturn finishing up Capricorn, Jupiter in Capricorn, Pluto in Capricorn, there's that backlash to try and keep the control. And you just see example after example of heavy-handedness with those authority figures, the unmarked police, the military going to democratic cities. You see these examples happening that, Jupiter are mind-boggling. There again will be, I think, more violence, more backlash, more harshness with these Mars-Saturn squares. And I sometimes wonder, will we get to be a country, and I thank international listeners for my U.S. perspective and focus. I think at some point this will calm down. But throughout the 240-some-year history of the United States, we've swayed back and forth between inclusive and exclusive principles. It's the Sun Cancer square Saturn Libra. It is the Neptune Virgo square with Mars Gemini. It is the Mercury Pluto opposition. Stay tuned. But here's something I'd like to point out to you. We keep hearing that phrase, defund the police, defund the police. When I first heard that, I was like, well, what does that mean? In essence, it's decreasing police departments and increasing social services and social support systems budgets. Well, as I started reading about it, I came across this concept called qualified immunity. It was a law passed in the state of, it was either Maine or Massachusetts, was the first state to pass qualified immunity for police unions back in 1973. 41 states have followed suit. And basically, it's a doctrine that protects police from excessive force lawsuits. They're basically, have wide immunity from being held responsible. They get a rest period before they are interrogated or, asked what happened. There's all kinds of various principles to this doctrine that basically lets them off the hook. It creates a harder standard of evidence when they when they are charged. And they almost always, get off. And so, interesting thing to look at here. This might be part of as Jupiter and Saturn go into Aquarius and have a 20-year cycle, and going into the air element of, Aquarius in its evolving perspective is more social equity. May this be so, because Mars is not going to let Saturn get away with being the powerhouse anymore. Here's the Mars waxing squares to Pluto as well as its early conjunction. So here's the evolution of our desires, personally and collectively, unconsciously and consciously. And so here's that crazies in action or concerted effort to move forward versus being stuck in the past. You can see it playing out. Liberal forces wanting to move us forward, conservative forces wanting to keep things just as they are. So how's this acting for you personally? You see these 3 waxing squares as they're going to take place, and all of these will be in Capricorn. You see how tight the degrees are. You can look to see where that 23, 22, 23, 24 degrees Aries Capricorn is in your chart. This is when where your own soul is wanting to break out in regards to your evolving desires, what you want to do different, what you want to manifest. So, relative to Capricorn in a healthy perspective, can you put one foot in front of the other? Can you pace yourself? Can you pay attention to what you want to create in your world and how you want to create it for you personally? Can you be okay in this world, regardless of the intensity and extreme and chaos going on? So I wanted to just speak just a moment about Capricorn and race. There's this loose concept of those who think that Homo sapiens came up out of the northern part of Africa and traveled into Europe, crossed the Bering Strait, traveled by land, traveled by sea, however. But there is this wide concept that most of the Homo sapiens we have now came out of northern Africa. And that's why it's sometimes called the motherland. Motherland. And that became loosely known with the concept of Cancer, the mother. Capricorn, the polarity of that loosely father, although EA doesn't do gender specific, it's fluid. But so that Cancer Capricorn and the Africans were known for coming, populating there. So Capricorn and Cancer have a loose relationship with the concept of different races. So does Pisces, Neptune in the 12th house. In that regard, then it comes to melatonin and the pigmentation of the skin. And so with regard to the patriarchal distortions in Capricorn, this archetype relates to authority figures, positions of authority. And in patriarchally based societies, those in power want to have domination over others. So here in the United States, we have natal Pluto in Capricorn, and we have a history that stems from Black slavery. The original Constitution, I didn't have time to look at the details, counted a Black as 3/5 of a person or something like that. Blacks did not get the constitutional right to vote until the 14th Amendment was added to the U.S. Constitution in 1868. Not the right to vote, the right to citizenship. And I think it loosely gave him the right to vote, but we had all of the stuff that happened from then until 1965 when we had the Voting Rights Act that has been decimated by the Supreme Court in the last couple of years. Now, this amendment considered more things, so you can click on those if you want to when you get your PowerPoint slides and look at those if you want. I point this out because we know, just looking at the United States, that we forced Black people to come over here against their will 400 years ago. And so there is a long, long history of racism that is steeped within this country. So here is the US Gemini chart, or the July 4th chart, with the 14th Amendment as the outer wheel. And that was passed by Congress July 9th, 1868. So I put it in Washington at 12 p.m. Look at how we have Uranus, Sun, Mercury, and Venus all in Cancer. You can see a tight Mercury conjunction, and Mercury is retrograde, as stationary Mercury is retrograde, having to come back and deal with this again. And this was basically after the Civil War. And how do we give Blacks a voice? How do we give them the right to citizenship? And I found that interesting because there are other things that and other aspects that are going on, but I'm just looking at the Cancer Capricorn right now. Here's the bi-wheel, okay? And with the bi-wheel, I put in as the third wheel, or excuse me, tri-wheel. The third wheel is the Mars opposition to the Sun. And so remember, they have their opposition at 21 degrees Aries Libra. And here they are squaring the natal Pluto and Mercury, but they're also squaring this 14th Amendment that gave Blacks citizenship and I think essentially the right to vote, although I might be a little wrong. I thought, oh, here we go again. We're addressing all this stuff on another layer, on another level, all over again. And this time with the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto stellium in Capricorn, it is the race inequality and police brutality that is at the forefront of everything right now. Stay tuned. We shall see how it unfolds, but it's such a major theme. You just can't escape it right now, and it's becoming one of the dominant themes in the US presidential election. Now, Mars also makes waxing semi-sextiles to Neptune. And so here are the multiple efforts to initiate whatever is emerging as some of our deepest beliefs. So look at people who are recognizing the racial inequality and the oppression of Blacks by police and starting to stand with them. But we also have those who just deny it. And in the midst of all of these, both of these groups, we have all of the dishonesties. I always call Mars Neptune honesty in action or the lack thereof. And we can see both of this going on with everything. But here I want to bring COVID into the picture. When Mars made that conjunction to Neptune here at 21 Pisces in mid-June, this was the heyday. Again, all the infections coming, all of the death rates coming, everybody just disbelief that our country could be so unprepared. And, I think this again was that turning point against Donald Trump because of the outrageousness of his statements and how he just completely ignores it right now. His own Neptune square the nodes, which I will show you. But, I think Mars Neptune as a planetary pair governs in general manufacturing a vaccine for immunity. Mars rules the immune system. A vaccine is what we use to try and create immunity to viruses and some bacterias, and Mars is the actions to do it. So as we see these three waxing semi-sextiles, as I had said earlier, we rush to create something that turns out not to be effective. I don't expect the United States to create an effective vaccine. I think that there will be other countries that will be more responsible in doing it. We'll see how all this turns out, but as we look at Mars, Neptune, here's where you can't ignore Donald Trump's chart, because transiting Neptune is squaring his nodal axis 5 times in 2020 and 21. So those that blindly project the de facto God energy onto him, the chosen one, if you've ever read anything about, there was a Vanity Fair article about people who follow him to all his rallies and he speaks in code and blah, 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 blah. But I think the majority is going to be a public that is growing weary over his actions and his dishonesty and basically saying, I can't take 4 more years of him. It will take extreme efforts of action, though, because he's going to have a nodal axis return just a few days before the November 3rd election, October 29th, his 4th nodal axis return. Will he have emotional, legal, and financial reckonings? Or will he get away with more lies and lies and lies to further his self-aggrandizement? And of course, we are looking at the Mars retrograde cycle, making 3 last quarter squares to his Venus and Saturn. The nepotism of the Republican convention when half the speaker's last name was Trump. There are articles out in the media about Donald Trump Jr. being extremely active in wanting to re-elect his father because he is really scared of the legal ramifications if his father loses. May it be so. And not only legal ramifications for Donald Trump, but for his children as well. So you can see just how active the Mars retrograde is in his chart, and you can see how the stellium is active with oppositions, creating this grand cross in his chart. And with the exception of transiting Sun, we can bring in the natal Jupiter here. We get an active grand cross all the way through the next 2 to 3 months with his chart. When I first saw the nodal return conjunction of his chart earlier this year, and I was looking at a forecast for him, this was before COVID became in the news. I was like, holy moly, is this guy going to get elected? What's it reelected? What's it going to take? Well, called a little bug. I don't know that he can turn it around, but I don't trust the systems in place with these Capricorn planets. Active, 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 active. The nodal axis makes south node waxing trine, north node waning sextile to Mars. You know, there's opportunities here for truth, but there's also opportunities to spread the lies. How are we going to choose to look at things and move forward? Show me the truth, show me the truth, show me the truth, or my God's better than your God. Stay tuned. We will find out as time goes by. Finally, here's the Mars stationary direct chart. It will come literally 10 days after the US presidential election. Will this country have peace or war? And it's after the election that the third cycle of these Mars waxing squares to the stellium are going to come about. Stay tuned. Sorry, I know I sound like a repeating record player, but there's just such singular, strong themes with this Mars retrograde and its aspects to the stellium. Now, I want to bring in Joe Biden's chart, and around the outer wheel, I put the opening of the polls for November 3rd, which is always 7 a.m. in Washington, D.C. You can see that that sun in Scorpio will be on his natal Mars. There are, you know, various aspects going on. I don't know if I necessarily see anything strongly sticking out for me. Maybe the public in Gemini on a Saturn. Does the public split with him or against him here? Time will tell. Here is Kamala's chart, and she has a nodal axis in Gemini Sag, just like Donald Trump. His is, I think, about 20 degrees. Hers is 24. You can see where the nodal axis will be on election day in regards to her. She's going to have that sun on her Neptune. She's going to have the Mercury on her sun. Other aspects, the stellium squaring her moon. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expertise in, you know, prediction with charts, but I will say here's what excited me. Here's the composite chart between Biden and Harris running together on the Democratic ticket. The biggest thing is that the sun on election day will literally start on their Mercury, and as the day moves on, it will end just shy of their composite sun. The US presidential elections always take place during Sun in Scorpio, and the US seems to have this history again of going back and forth between Democrats and Republicans. And yet, as the social statistics in this country really have us creating a melting pot, the last two times Republicans won, they lost the popular vote and won through Supreme Court interference with George Bush, Al Gore, and won with the inequalities of the electoral college in regards to Donald Trump. This is what gives me hope. And then the composite south node at 27 degrees Capricorn, it's 2719. And the US natal Pluto is 27 Capricorn, 35 minutes. Here's their Uranus on the natal US Mercury, as well as that north node. Here's the stellium getting ready to just go over all of that right after the election. It gives me hope when I look at this composite chart. Now, Mars does stir things up with the 3 conjunctions to the composite Saturn. Will this mean that we're going to, in Aries, create new leadership, new social structures? We'll see. Time will tell. Will we move forward with new understandings and concepts towards, fairness and racial equality with the transiting nodes over their composite Jupiter? Another one to look at and observe as time goes by. Again, I would say to you, be just as active as you can be. We, on those who would like to see Biden Harris elected, have to get more votes than the simple majority. Finally, what desires have I exhausted and how do I let go? How do I slow down and listen? Listen inwardly to my higher self and outwardly to others. What emerging desires are coming up into my consciousness? How do I find the courage to act upon those desires? How do I act in fairness with myself and others? How do I want to be a part of planet Earth? All right, thank you everyone. 2 more slides. Any questions from Leroy? Here are future Mars retrograde cycles. You see we skip Taurus, we'll go into Gemini, then we'll do Leo back to Cancer and Virgo back to Leo as we move our way through this next decade. Coming off of a busy summer, I have one more webinar, October 14th. I think with the way our family schedule is, I think this I think this will be the day after Mercury turns retrograde is what my point is. I'm thinking Mercury turns retrograde October 13th, and I'm not finding it right away. You'll have it in your slides. Anyway, that's the day of the free Mercury retrograde webinar in Scorpio Libra. I will be a part of an EA Zoom Mercury retrograde panel next week, October 10th. I'm not remembering what time specifically. I'm being asked to do a specific chart example for a volunteer to show you Mercury retrograde in action. So turn into that if you want to. Questions, Leroy?
No, you are completely clear. Thank you for all the insights, though, Antonio. Antonia says, and of course we have many other thank yous on the board, but no cue.
All right, everybody, do your very, very, very best to be a part of peace on planet Earth. And may you manifest your heart's desires through this Mercury retrograde. All the best to everybody. Thank you. Adios.